The rain fell like 1,000 needles, piercing the silence of the sleeping city. Neon lights bled into puddles, turning the wet pavement into a mirror of forgotten dreams. Amid rushing umbrellas and indifferent footsteps, an old woman sat alone against a cold concrete wall. Her clothes clung to her frail body, her hands trembling around a broken umbrella. No one stopped. Not one soul. Ethan Cole, tall, polished, untouchable, a man who built towers but avoided eye contact, walked through the storm without looking up. He was late, as always, his thoughts buried in deadlines and blueprints, but something in the corner of his vision made him hesitate. A movement, small and fragile, like a candle about to die. He turned, and the world seemed to hold its breath. There she was. The old woman everyone else had stepped around. Her eyes were tired, distant, yet strangely familiar, as if they'd once looked at him with warmth instead of rain. Ethan froze. For a moment, he didn't understand the ache that spread through his chest. Then he saw her shiver, lips trembling, and instinct pushed him forward. He knelt beside her, his expensive shoes sinking into the cold water. The city noise dimmed, replaced by the soft rhythm of rain hitting asphalt. "You'll catch your death out here," he murmured, removing his coat without thinking. As he draped it over her shoulders, something shifted in her face. Confusion, then wonder, then recognition. Her cracked lips parted. "Ethan?" she whispered. The name struck like thunder. His breath caught, his heart stumbled in disbelief. There was no reason a stranger should know his name, no reason except one buried deep in memory. He stared at her face, searching for a trace of the impossible truth rising within him. For 25 years, that voice had lived only in dreams, soft, gentle, calling him in the dark. Now it trembled before him, wrapped in his coat. His pulse pounded in his ears as the rain blurred everything except her eyes. "Mom?" The word escaped before he could stop it. Fragile, disbelieving, terrified to be wrong. The old woman gasped softly, a sound halfway between a sob and a prayer. The world around them vanished. No traffic, no city, only the rhythm of the rain. Ethan's heart broke under the weight of realization. The mother he had mourned, the woman he thought dead, was alive, invisible to everyone but him. The streetlight flickered above them, casting a trembling glow over the reunion. People passed by, still blind, still hurrying. But Ethan didn't move. He held her cold hands between his, whispering, "How is this possible?" Her tears mixed with the rain, and she smiled faintly as if she had been waiting for this storm all her life. And there, under the rain, one truth became undeniable. The city hadn't just forgotten her. He had. The shame burned through his chest, heavier than the storm. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to ask 1,000 questions, but no words came. Only silence and rain. Before we dive deeper into what happened that night, and how Ethan's life would change forever, take a moment to breathe. If this moment touched your heart, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have stopped for her? Because what happens next will break and heal you in the same breath. The world around Ethan blurred into streaks of neon. Her whisper echoed in his chest like a haunting melody from another lifetime. Ethan. It wasn't just a name. It was a memory awakened, a wound reopened. He stared at her face, the wrinkles like rivers carved by time, trying to find the woman who once kissed his forehead goodnight. Could it truly be her? For a long moment neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, relentless, almost merciless. The woman's eyes trembled, flickering between confusion and recognition. Ethan's voice cracked when he finally found the courage to ask, "Do you know me?" Her answer was a nod so faint it could have been mistaken for the shiver of cold. 1,000 questions collided inside him. Where had she been? Why hadn't she returned? How had she ended up here, invisible, forgotten? He felt the ache of 25 lost years pressing down like the weight of the storm above. She reached out, brushing his cheek with trembling fingers. The touch was weak, but real. That single touch shattered the wall he'd built around his heart. It was her. He knew it now. The scent of rain on her skin, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. Everything whispered of home. The same home he'd buried in memory. His vision blurred, though he wasn't sure if it was the rain or tears. "It's really you," he whispered. Passers-by still hurried past, their umbrellas forming a canopy of indifference. One or two glanced their way, then looked down again, unwilling to see what. Compassion demanded. Ethan's jaw tightened. For the first time, he understood how cruel blindness could be. "No one saw you," he murmured. "No one even looked." The old woman gave a faint smile, as if the world's neglect no longer surprised her. "People forget," she said softly. "They always do." Her words cut deeper than accusation. They were resignation. Ethan swallowed hard, guilt tightening around his throat. He had been one of them. Until tonight. He offered his arm, helping her to stand. Her legs trembled under the effort, and he caught her before she could fall. For a moment they stayed like that, son and mother, though the truth still felt too fragile to name. "Let's get you warm," he said. The words came out as a promise, more than a suggestion. They walked slowly through the rain, the city's glow wrapping them in surreal colors, blue, gold, red, fading into mist. She leaned against him, her breath shallow, her steps uncertain. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't let her vanish again. The night itself seemed to hold them, unwilling to let go. As they passed a storefront window, Ethan caught their reflection. A successful man beside a woman no one had seen. Two worlds colliding under the same storm. He saw the child he once was, reflected in her weary face. The child who had waited by the door for a mother who never came home. Until tonight. Inside him something began to break, and something else began to heal. He didn't know what answers awaited, or what ghosts still lingered in the shadows of their past. But one truth was clear. The woman who spoke his name had returned from the edges of the world, and nothing in Ethan's life would ever be the same again. The cafe was nearly empty, its windows fogged with breath and rain. Ethan guided her inside, the smell of coffee and damp coats filling the air. She sat by the window, hands cupped around a steaming mug, staring as though the world outside was something she didn't belong to anymore. Ethan watched her silently, afraid that if he blinked, she'd disappear again. Every second felt borrowed. "Where have you been?" The question left his lips before he could stop it. Her gaze drifted toward the window, following the raindrops that raced down the glass. "Everywhere," she whispered. "And nowhere." Her voice carried both distance exhaustion and a voice shaped by years of silence. Ethan's heart sank under the weight of those words. She began to speak in fragments. Shelters, streets, hospitals, faces that blurred together like raindrops on glass. People who offered kindness, others who took it away. Ethan listened, each detail cutting deeper. He had imagined her dead, but never lost like this, wandering unseen through the same city he thrived in. The guilt was unbearable. He wanted to reach for her, to apologize, but something in her eyes stopped him, a quiet strength that refused pity. "You were doing fine without me," she said softly. "I saw you once, on a billboard." Ethan froze. He remembered that campaign, his face beside a skyscraper, smiling. He'd never imagined his success could wound. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. The city hummed with indifferent life. Cars, laughter, sirens, all unaware that a lost mother and son were finding each other over cooling cups of coffee. Ethan couldn't stop staring at her hands, the same hands that once tied his shoes, now calloused and trembling. Time had not been kind. "Why didn't you come back?" he asked, voice shaking. Margaret's eyes filled with something darker than pain, fear. She looked around, lowering her voice. "Because they said you were better off without me." Ethan frowned. "They? Who?" But she only shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Not now," she whispered. "Not here." The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, but the storm inside him only grew. Ethan leaned back, feeling the cold glass of the window against his spine. His world, the offices, the designs, the glossy perfection, felt suddenly hollow. Every polished surface hid a shadow of the woman before him, and every success now looked like betrayal. She reached for his hand, her skin fragile but warm. "I always believed you'd find me," she murmured, "even when I stopped believing in myself." Ethan's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no blueprint to fix what was broken. All he could do was hold her hand, as if that alone could rewrite the past. Silence filled the cafe. The waitress passed by, glancing curiously at the pair, one elegant, one forgotten, but said nothing. Ethan realized that to the world they were just another odd pair among many. But to him, this was the moment his entire life had been leading to. The day his foundation cracked and his heart began to rebuild. As he paid the bill and helped her to her feet, she hesitated by the door. "You shouldn't have found me," she whispered. But Ethan only smiled faintly. "Then it's a good thing I didn't listen." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of thunder, and somewhere deep within him the storm had only just begun. Ethan's apartment had always been silent, the kind of silence that echoed wealth and loneliness in equal measure. The elevator doors opened to a world of glass, steel, and cold light. Margaret stepped inside hesitantly, her reflection multiplying across the walls. "You live here," she whispered. Ethan nodded, though the pride he once felt was gone. Now it all looked too clean, too distant. She moved slowly, fingertips brushing across a marble counter, a bookshelf, a photo frame. The walls told a story, his story, built on ambition, not warmth. A picture caught her eye. Ethan in a suit, smiling beside a man she recognized instantly. "Your father?" she asked. He paused before answering. "Yes." The word felt heavier than it should. Margaret lingered by the photo, her shoulders tightening. "He hasn't changed much," she murmured. Ethan turned away, pretending to pour water into glasses. "He says you left us," he said quietly. The air thickened, as if the city itself were listening. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at the skyline through the window, the same city that had swallowed her whole. "I didn't leave," she finally said. "I was taken." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Ethan froze, the glass slipping slightly in his grip. "Taken," he echoed. She nodded, eyes distant. "Some things are better left buried, Ethan." But he could see it. The flicker of fear she couldn't hide. The kind that comes from remembering too much. That night, Margaret slept on the couch, curled under a blanket too thin for comfort. He sat in his office, couldn't sleep. Screens glowing softly around him, each blueprint suddenly meaningless. He opened old news archives on his computer, searching for her name. The words blurred together. Missing person, no foul play suspected, case closed. He scrolled for hours until one headline froze him, a report signed by Harold Cole, his father, the man who had declared her disappearance unsuspicious. Ethan stared at the date, the same week he was placed in his father's sole custody. His stomach turned. "You knew," he whispered to the empty room. "You knew where she was." Outside, lightning flashed. throwing shadows across the glass walls. For a moment he thought he saw her reflection standing behind him, younger, crying, reaching out. But when he turned, it was only his own face, pale and haunted. The ghosts were real, they just wore familiar shapes. In the living room, Margaret stirred in her sleep, mumbling something Ethan couldn't hear. He approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "Mum," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy but aware. "They told me you were safe," she murmured. "They promised." Ethan felt his throat tighten, a lump of rage and sorrow too heavy to speak through. He covered her again with the blanket, watching as her breathing steadied. The storm outside had quieted, but inside his chest it raged louder than ever. He knew now that his father's silence had never been protection. It had been a wall. And, for the first time, Ethan wanted to break it. As dawn crept across the skyline, the first light of morning touched his mother's face. She looked peaceful for the moment, but he knew the shadows hadn't left. They were waiting, patient and dark. Ethan stood by the window, eyes fixed on the rising sun. The truth, he realized, was no longer buried in the past. It was coming for him. The house looked smaller than Ethan remembered. The white paint had faded, and the porch light flickered weakly against the grey morning sky. He hadn't been there in months, maybe years. His father's car sat in the driveway, polished as always, a symbol of discipline that had never softened with time. Ethan hesitated at the door before finally knocking. The echo felt like thunder. Harold Cole opened it after a long pause. The old man still carried the weight of authority, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, but there was a tremor in his stance that hadn't been there before. "Ethan," he said, voice clipped, "didn't expect to see you." Ethan studied him quietly. "We need to talk," he said. "It's about Mom." For a heartbeat, Harold's expression didn't move. Then, as if someone had pulled a string too tight, his jaw clenched. "She's gone, Ethan. Let the dead rest." But Ethan shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not dead." The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. Harold's hand tightened on the doorframe. They sat across from each other in the living room, the same room where Ethan had once built toy towers from wooden blocks while his father read the newspaper. Now the space felt smaller, the air thicker. "Where is she?" Harold demanded. "What have you done?" Ethan leaned forward, eyes sharp. "I found her, in the rain. She's alive." The words cracked the air like glass. Harold's composure faltered for the first time. "That's impossible," he muttered. "You must be mistaken." But the panic in his eyes betrayed him. Ethan's anger flared. "You lied to me," he said. "You knew she was out there, suffering, while I grew up thinking she abandoned us." The old man slammed his fist against the table. "You don't understand what she did." The outburst hung in the room, echoing off the walls. Ethan stared at him, heart pounding. "Then make me understand," he said. Harold's shoulders sagged. Slightly, as if the weight of his own memories was finally too much to bear. "She wasn't well," he began. "After the accident, after that night." He stopped abruptly, eyes darting to the window as if afraid someone might be listening. "What accident?" Ethan demanded. Harold stood, pacing. His voice grew quieter, almost pleading. "She needed help, Ethan. She was seeing things, talking about people following her. I tried to protect you from that." But Ethan saw through the cracks, the guilt that flickered behind every word. "You mean you silenced her?" he said coldly. Harold turned sharply. "Watch your tone," he warned. But the threat carried no power now. Ethan rose too, matching his father's height, though not his composure. "You didn't protect me," he said. "You protected yourself." For a long, suffocating moment, they stood there, two men divided by a lifetime of unspoken truths. Outside, thunder growled again. Finally, Harold spoke, voice low, breaking. You don't know what she was mixed up in. Ethan's pulse raced. Then tell me. But Harold only looked away, his eyes wet with something between fear and regret. Some things are better forgotten, he said, his voice trembling. If you love her, let it go. Ethan's jaw tightened. I already lost her once. I won't lose her to your silence. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, his father's voice followed him, cracked, fragile. Ethan. The sound stopped him for a moment. She wasn't the woman you think she was. Ethan didn't look back. Maybe not, he said, but she was my mother. And as he stepped into the storm once more, he realized the rain had never felt heavier. Ethan drove aimlessly through the rain, windshield wipers slicing across glass like frantic metronomes. His father's words echoed in his head. You don't know what she did. The sentence gnawed at him, twisting between guilt and confusion. What? Could his mother have possibly done that justified a lifetime of exile? The city lights blurred, but the storm inside him was far worse. By the time he reached his apartment, the rain had turned to mist. Margaret sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, her gaze fixed on the skyline, the glow of the city reflected in her tired eyes. You saw him, she said softly, without turning. Ethan hesitated, surprised she knew. Yes, he answered. He told me you left. Move, but a tremor passed through her shoulders. I didn't leave, she whispered. He made sure I couldn't. Ethan stepped closer, his voice tight. He said you weren't well. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. That's what they always say when the truth is inconvenient. Her tone was sharp, yet weary, the sound of someone who'd fought too long to be believed. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. Margaret stood, her frail figure silhouetted against the window. I tried to protect. You, Ethan, she said, but you were just a child. You wouldn't have understood. Her eyes glistened under the city lights. What wouldn't I have understood? He asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a trembling hand against the glass, watching the rain slide down like tears she could no longer shed. He wanted to shake her, to demand answers, but the fragility in her stance stopped him. The truth, whatever it was, seemed to live inside her like a wound that never healed. Mom, he said quietly, I need to know. She turned slowly, her face pale. Knowing won't bring peace, Ethan. It will take what's left of it. Her words left a hollow echo that filled the room. Later that night, Ethan found her asleep on the couch, murmuring in her dreams. Her voice was broken, trembling with fear. Don't take him. Please don't. Ethan froze. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. It's just a dream, he whispered. But even asleep, her body shook, trapped in a memory too dark to fade. He retreated to his office again, restless. The rain outside had become a soft drizzle, but his thoughts were a downpour. He opened the old letter she'd left on the counter, the one she'd been holding earlier that day. Inside, only a few faded lines. I did what I had to do. Forgive me. No signature, no clue, just the echo of a secret buried in her trembling handwriting. At dawn, the city glowed pale and silver. Ethan returned to the living room and found Margaret awake, staring at the photograph of Harold. He was kind once, she said quietly. Before the lies. Ethan sat beside her, unsure whether she was speaking to him or herself. You still loved him, he said. She smiled faintly. Love doesn't vanish. It just stops being safe. He reached for her hand. Whatever happened, he said. I want to understand. I need to. Her grip tightened weakly. Then promise me one thing. You find the truth, she said. Don't hate him. Hate never ends where it begins. Her words left him uneasy, not comforted but warned, as if she knew the darkness he was about to uncover. When she fell silent again, Ethan looked out the window. The rain had stopped. leaving the streets glistening under the pale morning sun. But inside, the storm refused to end. The fractures between memory and truth were spreading, and he could feel the fault line opening wider. Somewhere between them lay the reason. His mother vanished, and the man his father truly was. The morning light crept quietly through the blinds, painting thin stripes across the living room. Margaret was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Ethan moved silently around the apartment, cleaning the remains of last night's storm, coffee cups, scattered papers, the weight of unanswered questions. But when he reached for her small, worn handbag, curiosity overpowered guilt. Something. Inside, it rustled. Something old, folded, forgotten. He hesitated before opening it. The bag smelled faintly of rain and dust, the scent of long-kept secrets. Inside, tucked between tissues and faded receipts, was a yellowed envelope. His name wasn't on it, but somehow he knew it was meant for him. The paper crackled softly as he unfolded it. The first words blurred before his eyes, trembling under the pressure of decades. To whoever finds this, I tried to protect my son. Ethan's chest tightened as he read. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable, his mother's. The letter spoke of fear, of voices warning her to stay silent. It mentioned men in uniform, a friend of Harold's, and a threat that if she didn't disappear, Ethan would suffer for it. The words child services appeared twice, circled in desperation. By the end, one line stood alone. Please keep him safe. He must never know what happened that night. His hands trembled. What night? He searched the rest of the letter, but there was no date, no explanation, only a smudged signature and a faint ink stamp from a police precinct. The name beneath it made his breath stop. Detective Harold Cole. His father's name etched in black. The same man who had filed the report that closed her missing person case. Ethan felt the room tilt. The air thickened, suffocating. He folded the letter, but the words wouldn't leave his mind. Every syllable burned like truth, denied. He wanted to confront her immediately, but something inside him, fear, maybe mercy, stopped him. Instead, he sat alone on the edge of his desk, staring at the skyline. His father had lied. His entire childhood had been built on that lie. When Margaret woke, her eyes went straight to the bag, and to the empty space where the letter had been. "Ethan," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, "what did you take?" He held the folded paper between his fingers, reluctant to show it. "I had to know," he said. "I found this." Her face drained of color. For a moment she looked ancient, ghost-like. "You shouldn't have read it." "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you write something like this? What happened that night?" She turned away, gripping the window frame as if the glass might hold her up. "Because truth isn't always safety," she said. "Some things survive only in silence." Ethan's frustration broke through. "Silence destroyed us." His voice echoed, raw and trembling. She didn't turn around. The sound of her soft sobs filled the space between them. "I thought I was saving you," she whispered, "but I was saving him too." Ethan froze. "Him?" She nodded weakly. "Your father. He wasn't always the monster I remembered. They made him choose, Ethan. And he chose you." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling through his mind. Nothing made sense anymore. He wanted to believe her, but the letter in his hand told a darker story. Stamp, the name, the fear hidden between each line, it all pointed to one truth. His father hadn't been forced. He'd participated, and for the first time Ethan felt something colder than betrayal. Clarity, the kind that sharpens grief into purpose. He folded the letter again, this time carefully, like a sacred wound. "I can't protect him anymore," he said. "Not if it means burying what you went through." Margaret turned toward him, tears shining in her eyes. "If you go after the truth," she said softly, "you'll lose what little of him you have left." Ethan stared out at the rain returning to the city, his reflection fractured in the glass. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Outside, thunder rolled again, deep and distant, a sound like memory stirring. Ethan slipped the letter into his jacket pocket, the paper pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. The storm had come back to the city, but this time he wasn't running from it. He was walking straight into it. The rain followed Ethan all the way to his father's house, as if the sky itself refused to let him come dry. The letter burned in his pocket, its edges damp from his hands. Every step toward the front door felt heavier, slower, as though the air around him thickened with truth. When Harold opened the door, his son didn't wait for permission. He walked straight in. "We're done pretending," Ethan said. Harold's face was pale, his eyes wary. "What is this about?" Ethan tossed the folded letter onto the table between them. It landed with a soft, terrible sound. "Recognize your own signature?" The older man hesitated before picking it up. When his gaze fell on the words, the color drained from his face. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice almost trembling. "With her," Ethan replied. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking of a clock filled the silence like a heartbeat. Then Harold exhaled, sinking into a chair. "You weren't supposed to see that," he muttered. "You weren't supposed to know." Ethan's voice hardened. "You made sure of that, didn't you?" His father's hands shook as he folded the letter again. "You don't understand what was happening back then." "Then make me understand," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Tell me why you lied to me. Tell me why my mother spent 25 years on the street while you slept in this house." Harold's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked toward the window, as if looking for escape. "She was going to ruin everything," he said finally. "She saw something she wasn't supposed to see." The words struck like lightning. Ethan froze. What did she see? Harold's silence was answer enough. He rubbed his temples, exhausted, then looked up at his son. "A cop, a friend of mine, made a mistake. A bad one. She witnessed it, said she'd go public. If she had, it would have destroyed families, careers. I begged her to stay quiet, but she wouldn't. They said she was unstable. I believed them. Or maybe I wanted to." The admission hit Ethan like a blade. "You had her locked away," he whispered. "You called her unstable because she told the truth." Harold's eyes filled with something almost like shame. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "They told me she was dangerous, that she might hurt you. And when the doctors confirmed it, I signed the papers." His voice broke. "I didn't visit. I couldn't." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "You didn't protect me," he said quietly. "You erased her." He stood, pacing the room, unable to look at his father. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up hating the person who loved you most, to think she walked away because of me?" Harold rose too, his old authority returning in flashes. "You think I didn't suffer?" he shouted. "I lost her too." The room trembled with silence after the outburst. Ethan turned back slowly, his voice now calm. Too calm. "No," he said. "You didn't lose her. You let her disappear." Harold looked away, shoulders collapsing under years of regret. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he whispered. "They promised to take care of her, not—" He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence was louder than any truth. "What did they do to her, Dad?" Ethan demanded. Harold's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, the man who had always seemed unbreakable began to shake. "I don't know," he said. "After the transfer, they told me she'd been moved to another facility. I tried to find her once, but it was too late." He dropped the letter back onto the table. "I told myself she was dead. It was easier." Ethan's breath caught. The rain outside roared, pounding the windows. "You destroyed her life to protect your pride," he said. Harold didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at his hands, the same hands that had signed away his wife's freedom. For the first time, Ethan felt no anger, only pity. The man before him wasn't a monster. He was a coward who had built his entire life around a single lie. Ethan turned toward the door. "She remembers, Dad," he said softly, "and now the world will too." Harold looked up, fear flashing across his face. "Ethan, don't do this. It'll ruin everything." Ethan paused at the threshold, rain already seeping into his sleeves. "Then maybe it deserves to be ruined." The door closed behind him, and for the first time, Harold Cole was left alone with nothing but the sound of rain and the weight of truth unfolding. The road stretched out before them, narrow and cracked, winding through the industrial outskirts of the city. Ethan drove in silence, the old letter resting on the dashboard, fluttering each time the car hit a bump. Beside him, Margaret sat wrapped in his coat, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It used to be beautiful here," she murmured, "before they turned it into a graveyard of walls." Ethan didn't ask what she meant. He could already feel the ghosts waiting ahead. They arrived at a building that looked half devoured by time, the old St. Augustine Hospital. Its windows were boarded, its gate chained shut, the sign rusted and hanging by one nail. Ethan cut the engine and stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes echoing in the hollow air. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Margaret nodded faintly. "This is where they kept me." He broke the lock with a heavy wrench from the trunk. The gate screamed open, its hinges protesting years of neglect. Inside, the corridors smelled of mold and dust, a sickly reminder of antiseptic long gone. Flashlight beams swept across peeling paint and collapsed ceilings. Margaret walked slowly, her fingers tracing the walls like someone reading Braille made of memory. "I can still hear the voices," she whispered. "They never stopped talking." Ethan followed close, phone camera recording everything. "What did they do to you here?" he asked gently. Margaret's breath trembled. "They called it treatment, but it was punishment. They wanted me to forget." Her voice quivered but didn't break. "I told them about the man your father worked with, the one who hurt that girl. They said I was confused." Her steps faltered, the weight of memory bending her spine. In one room, sunlight slipped through the broken window, falling across an old bed. Frame bolted to the floor. Margaret froze. "That was mine," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Ethan turned on the flashlight again, scanning the walls, numbers, initials, scratches carved by desperate hands. One stood out, MC 1999. His throat tightened. She had left her mark, proof that she had been here, a ghost that refused to vanish. Ethan began taking photos. "We'll show this to someone," he said. "A journalist, a lawyer, someone who'll listen." Margaret gave a sad smile. "People only listen when the dead speak." She touched the letters again, her fingers trembling. "I screamed every night, Ethan. Not because I was afraid, because I thought you might hear me." He looked away, tears burning behind his eyes. As they moved deeper, a door creaked somewhere in the dark. Ethan froze. "Hello?" No answer, only the drip of rain seeping through cracks in the roof. Margaret gripped his arm, her nails pressing into his sleeve. "They don't want us here," she whispered. "They never did." The flashlight flickered once, then steadied again. Ethan forced a steady voice. "Then they'll have to see us anyway." They reached the end of the corridor, a small office with dusty file cabinets toppled onto the floor. Ethan dug through folders, his hands shaking as he found old patient records. One folder bore her name, Margaret Cole. Inside, photos, medical forms, and a stamped report reading transferred without notice. Ethan's eyes widened. The signature at the bottom was familiar, Detective Harold Cole. Margaret sank into a chair, her breath shallow. "He signed it himself," Ethan whispered. "He didn't just know. He made it happen." She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where a sliver of sunlight cut through the gloom. "He was following orders," she murmured weakly. "He always followed orders." Ethan dropped the file, anger mixing with sorrow until he couldn't tell which was stronger. When they stepped back outside, the sky had turned grey again. Margaret leaned heavily on his arm, her steps uneven. "You've seen what you needed to," she said. "Now let it rest." But Ethan shook his head. "No, not until they remember you." She smiled faintly. "They never forgot me, Ethan. They just made sure no one else would remember." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and somewhere behind them, a door inside the hospital closed on its own. Night had fallen by the time they reached the alley. The rain returned, softer now, whispering against the pavement like the echo of everything unsaid. Ethan parked the car under a flickering streetlight, its glow barely touching the wet cobblestones. The air smelled of rust, oil, and rain-soaked paper. Margaret stared ahead, unmoving. "It was here," she whispered. "This is where they found me." Ethan stepped out first, opening an umbrella over her. The street was empty except for the rhythmic hum of the rain and a distant siren crying somewhere in the city. "What happened here?" he asked. Margaret didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned the brick walls, following invisible paths of memory. "They said they'd help me, but they dragged me instead." Her voice trembled like the rain sliding down glass. He guided her closer to the narrow doorway, half hidden behind trash bins. Faded graffiti covered the bricks, angry colors bleeding into each other. "That's where—" "They stopped the car," she said. "I remember the sound of metal, the smell of gasoline, and your father's voice." Ethan froze. "Dad was here." She nodded. "He told them to be gentle, but he didn't stop them." The words left her lips like confession. Lightning illuminated the alley for a second, and for that brief moment Ethan saw her as she must have been that night, younger, terrified, caught between pleading and disbelief. His throat closed. He wanted to deny it, to believe his father hadn't been part of it, but denial no longer fit inside the truth. He reached out, steadying her trembling arm. "You don't have to relive this," he whispered. "Yes," she said. "I do." He pulled out his phone and began recording. "Tell me everything," he said gently. Margaret nodded, her breath visible in the cold air. "They came in a black car," she began. "Two men I'd never seen before. They said Harold sent them to take me to a hospital for evaluation. I trusted them." Her voice cracked. "Then one of them said, 'She talks too much.' That's when I knew." As she spoke, the rain fell harder, drumming on the umbrella like heartbeat thunder. Ethan held the phone steady, though his hand shook. Margaret looked up toward the dim light above the doorway. "They pushed me against that wall," she said, pointing. "I tried to call for help. People walked by. No one stopped. Not one." Her words broke, and Ethan felt something in him shatter. He turned the camera toward the street, filming the emptiness, the indifference that had once consumed the moment. "They'll see it now," he said, voice low but fierce. "Everyone will." Margaret's eyes softened. "You can't fight the past, Ethan," she whispered. "It doesn't fight fair," but he only shook his head. "Then I'll change how it ends." A shadow moved at the end of the alley, tall, slow, watching. Ethan froze. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Margaret's hand tightened around his sleeve. A man stepped briefly into the lamplight before disappearing again into the darkness. "It's him," she murmured, voice barely audible. "One of them." Ethan's pulse quickened. "We should go." But she didn't move. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then a voice echoed softly from the dark. "Some stories should stay buried, Mr. Cole." Ethan turned toward the sound, heart pounding, but the alley was empty again. Margaret clutched her chest, her breathing unsteady. "They're still watching," she whispered. "After all these years." Ethan took her hand and pulled her close. "Let them watch. This time, I'm not walking away." As they reached the car, thunder cracked directly overhead. Ethan looked back one last time. The rain had washed the alley clean, yet the memory of what happened there would never fade. "This is where she disappeared," he murmured to himself, "and this is where I start bringing her back." Behind them, the light above the doorway flickered once, twice, before going out completely. The night felt heavier when they returned home. Even the air seemed to listen. Ethan locked the door twice and drew the curtains shut, his reflection flickering in the glass like a ghost split in two. Margaret sat silently on the couch, clutching a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "You saw him too, didn't you?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. He moved through the apartment, turning off lights, checking windows. The city outside glowed faintly, distant and indifferent, but Ethan felt eyes in every shadow. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but curiosity won. One message, one image. His blood turned cold. It was a photo of Margaret asleep on the couch taken through the apartment window. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Margaret looked up. "What is it?" He hesitated, then showed her the screen, her face drained of color. "No," she whispered, trembling. "It's happening again." Ethan tried to speak, but his throat closed. The realization sank in. Someone had been here, watching, close enough to touch. He rushed to the window, tearing the curtains open. Rain streaked the glass, reflecting nothing but city lights. Still, he felt it, that pulse of danger just beyond sight. He stepped out onto the balcony, the night air sharp and metallic on his skin. "Who's there?" he shouted. Only the rain answered. Yet, somewhere below, a door slammed, echoing through the street like a threat whispered in metal. Back inside, Margaret was shaking uncontrollably. "We have to leave," she said. "Now." Ethan kneeled beside her, gripping her shoulders. "No one's taking you again," he said, his voice steady but his heart pounding. "Not this time." She stared into his eyes, desperate. "You don't understand, Ethan. They never stopped watching, not even when you were a boy." He froze. "What do you mean?" Her lips quivered. "They used to park near the house. Men in dark cars. Your father said they were protecting us." Her gaze darkened, but they were protecting him. The memory broke her voice. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. Every piece of his past suddenly felt tainted, every safe moment built on a lie. The next morning, the tension hadn't lifted. Ethan sat at his desk, the letter and photos spread before him like puzzle pieces. Margaret slept fitfully in the next room, murmuring fragments of her nightmares. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was just text. "Stop digging or she disappears again." His chest tightened, fury replacing fear. He printed the message, added it to the growing pile of evidence. "They want silence," he whispered, "but they're going to get noise." Dizzy. His reflection in the mirror looked different. Eyes colder, jaw set. He realized he wasn't just fighting for his mother anymore. He was fighting for every truth that had been buried beneath someone else's comfort. By the afternoon, he'd gathered every file, every photo, every note. "We're going to the press," he told Margaret when she woke. Her eyes widened in terror. "You'll put a target on your back," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Good, then they'll stop hiding." She looked at him with both fear and pride, the kind of pride a mother feels when she knows her son has finally found his courage. That night, As thunder rolled once again over the city, Ethan stayed awake by the window, watching the rain blur the skyline. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting, maybe his father, maybe the ghosts of men who never paid for what they did. Either way, he wasn't running anymore. He whispered into the storm, "You took her once, try again." And for the first time, the rain didn't sound like fear, it sounded like defiance. Morning broke with a dull silver light, the kind that makes the city look tired before the day even begins. Ethan stood at his desk surrounded by chaos, letters, photos, recordings, all laid out like pieces of a confession waiting to be heard. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from resolve. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had never thought he'd call. "This is Ethan Cole," he said. "I have a story for you." Across the line, the journalist's voice was calm but sharp, like someone who'd spent years chasing ghosts. "What kind of story?" she asked. "One that's been buried for 25 years, he replied. Within an hour, she was at his apartment, rain dripping from her coat, recorder already running. Margaret sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in her blanket, eyes red but determined. "If you're ready," Ethan said, "we'll tell you everything." The journalist listened in silence as Margaret spoke, haltingly, painfully, about the night she was taken, the hospital, the doctors, the lies. Each word carried years of fear breaking loose. Ethan showed the files, the letter with Harold's signature, the patient records stamped, transferred without notice. When the reporter finally looked up, her expression had changed. "This will destroy him," she said softly. Ethan's voice didn't waver. It should. By noon, the story had left the safety of his living room. The journalist's article went live, the headlines screaming across the city's screens, "Retired officer accused in decades-old cover-up." Ethan watched it unfold in real time. The photos, the names, the faces. Margaret sat beside him, silent, her hands clasped together. "It's out," he whispered. "They can't hide you anymore." Tears slid down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but release. The calls began almost immediately. Friends, former colleagues, even his father. Ethan ignored them all, staring out at the rain-soaked skyline. For the first time, the city seemed awake, alert to something bigger than itself. News vans lined the streets below. Reporters called it the forgotten witness case. For Margaret, it was just her life, finally seen. "I never wanted vengeance," she said softly. "Only truth." When Harold finally called again, Ethan answered. The voice on the other end was broken, stripped of its usual authority. "What have you done, son?" he rasped. "You've ruined everything." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling both pain and strange peace. "No, Dad," he said quietly. "I've fixed it." There was a long pause, then a whisper that barely reached the line. "You don't know what you've started." That evening, the story spread like wildfire. Social media filled with outrage, sympathy, disbelief. Old officers were questioned, files reopened. For the first time in decades, people spoke Margaret's name, not as rumor but as truth. She watched from the couch, trembling under the weight of being remembered. Ethan knelt beside her. "You're free now," he said. "Everyone knows." She smiled faintly. "Freedom's heavier than I remember." Outside, the city glowed with screens and sirens. Somewhere, Harold sat alone, watching his empire crumble in the light of his own lies. Ethan imagined him, the man who once seemed unbreakable, now small under the glare of truth. A strange mix of sorrow and justice filled his chest. He didn't hate him anymore. He pitied him. Later that night, as Margaret slept, Ethan stood by the window. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, like a heartbeat finding rhythm after chaos. Reflected in the glass, he saw his mother's face beside his, tired but free. "You did it, Mom," he whispered. "They remember." Somewhere deep inside, he felt the boy he once was finally exhale. The world had listened, but peace is never quiet for long. His phone buzzed once more. A new message, no number. "You think the truth is finished?" It read. "It never is." Ethan stared at the screen, the reflection of rain dancing in his eyes. For a moment, he almost smiled. "Then I guess we'll keep telling it," he said softly, turning off the light. The storm outside had ended, but the one inside had only just begun. By dawn, the city was alive with noise. Reporters outside police stations, headlines flashing across screens, the name Harold Cole echoing through every broadcast. Ethan watched from his apartment window, the weight of it all pressing against his chest. Margaret sat behind him quiet, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo she had kept for decades. "They finally see him," she whispered. "But it doesn't make me happy." Ethan turned. "It's not supposed to." Down below, cameras swarmed the Cole residence. Harold's once proud figure appeared at the doorway, older now, smaller, his face grey beneath the morning light. "I never meant to hurt her," he said to the flashing lights, voice shaking. "But I did, and I have to live with that." The admission spread like fire. Reporters shouted questions. For the first time, Harold Cole had no answers, only the truth he'd tried to bury. At home, Margaret watched the broadcast in silence. Ethan stood beside her, arms folded. The image of her husband's tear-streaked face filled the screen. "He looks so lost," she said softly. "He always was." For a long moment, neither spoke. The past hung between them like smoke, thick, bitter, inescapable. "You could hate him," Ethan said quietly. She shook her head. "I did. For too long. I won't die carrying that." The interview ended with Harold's voice breaking. "If justice means losing my son," he said, "then I deserve it." Ethan felt something inside him twist. Grief for the man he once admired, pity for the man he had become. He turned off the television, and the silence that followed felt sacred. "He finally said it," he whispered. "He finally told the truth." Margaret's eyes glistened. "Confession isn't freedom," she said. "It's surrender." Over the next days, the story consumed the city. Protests erupted outside the precinct where Harold had once worked. Old cases resurfaced, officers questioned, reputations cracked. Ethan gave no more interviews. He'd said all he needed to say. He spent his days caring for Margaret, making soup she barely touched, helping her walk when her strength faltered. "You can rest now," he told her. "The world is finally listening." But she only smiled, the kind of smile that hides pain. "The world doesn't listen forever, Ethan. One day they'll move on." He hated how right she was. "Then I'll remind them," he promised. Her eyes softened. "You already have." The afternoon light caught her hair, turning the grey to silver. She looked almost angelic, a fragile survivor in a city of noise. That evening, he received another call, this time from the hospital. Harold had collapsed during questioning. Ethan hesitated before going. Margaret urged him softly, "Go. Closure doesn't wait." The drive felt endless, each red light a heartbeat of doubt. When he arrived, Harold was lying in a hospital bed, tubes snaking into his arms. His eyes flickered open. "You came," he whispered. Ethan sat beside him, unsure what to feel. The man who once seemed unbreakable now looked like a shadow. "You destroyed her life," Ethan said quietly. Harold nodded weakly. "And mine," he replied. "I thought I was protecting something good, but all I protected was fear." His breath rattled. "Tell her I'm sorry." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "She saw your confession," he said. "She forgave you." For the first time, tears rolled freely down Harold's face. "Then I can rest," he murmured. The machines beeped steadily, then slowed. Ethan reached for his father's hand, surprised by how cold it felt. There was no anger left, only sadness, raw and quiet. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. "You can rest now too." The monitor flattened into silence, and with it 25 years of lies came to an end. When Ethan returned home, the city felt strangely still. He found Margaret asleep, the TV still glowing faintly. He sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. "It's over," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. She stirred, murmuring in her sleep, "No, it's beginning." Ethan looked toward the window. Outside, rain began to fall again. Soft, endless, cleansing. The rain had returned, softer now, like a memory refusing to fade. Ethan watching by the droplets raced down the glass, while his mother slept in the armchair beside him. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, but peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after a lifetime of storms. The doctor had called it fatigue, but Ethan knew better. Her body was surrendering, even as her spirit still clung to the world she had just rejoined. He made her tea every morning, though she barely drank it. She said she liked the smell more than the taste. It reminded her of home, of warmth. "Do you remember the old garden?" she asked one afternoon, her voice distant. "You used to chase the rain between the roses." Ethan smiled. "I remember." Her eyes drifted shut, a soft smile lingering. "That was before everything fell apart, before we forgot how to listen to the rain." As the days passed, she grew quieter, sleeping longer. Sometimes she'd talk to people who weren't there, her father, her younger self, even Harold. Ethan would listen without correcting her. The line between past and present had blurred, and he didn't want to pull her back. He'd sit by her side, holding her hand, tracing the veins that told stories older than words. One evening, thunder murmured faintly in the distance. Margaret stirred and looked toward the window. "It's raining again," she whispered. "Do you think it ever stops?" Ethan knelt beside her. "Only when it's time." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe my storm is ending." The words pierced through him like quiet lightning. He squeezed her hand tighter, afraid to let go. "You're safe now, Mom," he said. "You're home." Later that night he found her sitting awake, eyes fixed on the skyline. "Do you believe in forgiveness?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "I didn't," he said, "until you." She nodded slowly. "Forgiveness isn't for the ones who wronged us, Ethan. The parts of ourselves we lost, hating them." Her gaze softened. "Promise me you won't let bitterness grow where love once lived." His voice cracked. "I promise." The next morning, the world was drenched in silver light. Rain washed the streets, gentle and constant. Ethan woke to silence. He turned to the armchair. Margaret was still there, wrapped in the same blanket, her head tilted slightly toward the window. Her eyes were closed, and her expression was peaceful. The kind of peace she had been denied for 25 years. "Mom," he whispered, but the rain answered for her. He sat beside her for a long time, the city moving quietly outside. Cars passed, sirens wailed, life continued, indifferent yet beautiful. Ethan rested his head against her arm, letting the tears fall freely. "You found your way home," he murmured. "You can rest now." The scent of rain drifted through the open window, carrying with it something tender. Not loss, but the funeral was small. No reporters, no cameras, no spectacle, just Ethan, a few kind strangers, and the sound of rain tapping on umbrellas. He spoke briefly, not about her pain, but about her strength. "She was invisible to the world," he said, "but never to me." When the service ended, the rain stopped and sunlight broke through the clouds. It felt as though she had waited for that exact moment. Back at the apartment, the quiet was almost unbearable. Her blanket remained on. The armchair, her teacup still by the window. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, listening to the faint hum of the city, trying to memorize every echo of her presence. "You're still here," he whispered. "In the rain, in the silence, everywhere." Outside, a gentle drizzle began again, as if the world itself was answering. He opened the window and let the cool air rush in. The smell of wet earth and renewal filled the space. "Goodbye, Mom," he said softly. "Waiting for me in the rain." The city below glimmered under a curtain of silver, the same streets where she had once been forgotten, now reborn in light. Ethan stood there until the last drop fell, until the rain finally ceased, and peace, at last, took its place. Weeks passed. The rain became a distant memory, replaced by soft spring light spilling across the city. Ethan still walked the same streets, but they no longer felt cold. The corners that once echoed with loneliness now held quiet traces of her, in the smell of wet pavement, in the way strangers met his eyes without fear. The world hadn't changed, but he had. He visited the alley sometimes, not out of grief, but gratitude. The walls were clean now, the graffiti repainted, the doorway sealed. Where she had once been taken, he left a single white rose, wrapped in paper that read, "Remember the unseen." The petals glistened with dew like rain reborn. "You're free," he whispered, "and so am I." Ethan started volunteering at a local shelter, the kind of place his mother might have found once, had anyone cared enough to stop. The people there reminded him of her, fragile, invisible, waiting for kindness. He designed a small annex for them, a warm room with wide windows that opened toward the light. On the wall he engraved her name, Margaret's Place. The project grew quietly, one act of compassion at a time. Every coat donated, every meal served, every stranger seen. It all became a prayer whispered into the noise of the city. Sometimes he would watch the rain fall through the shelter windows, and he could almost feel her beside him. "You did it, Mom," he'd say softly. "You came back through me." One afternoon, as he was leaving the shelter, he noticed a woman huddled beneath a broken awning, soaked, shivering, ignored. For a second, the world folded in on itself, and he was back on that same street, that same storm. Without hesitation, he took off his coat and placed it gently over her shoulders. "You're safe now," he said. Her eyes lifted, uncertain but grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. As he stepped back, he saw something remarkable. Other people had stopped too. A young man handed her coffee. A woman offered an umbrella. The ripple had begun. Ethan smiled through the rain, realizing that compassion, once awakened, was contagious. "She's still changing the world," he thought, "one stranger at a time." That night he stood once more by his window, the city lights shimmering like stars trapped in glass. The rain returned, light and forgiving. He opened the window wide, letting it touch his skin. It no longer felt cold. It felt alive. "You taught me to see," he whispered into the night, "and now I'll never look away again." He poured himself a cup of tea, her favorite, and sat by the armchair that still held her blanket. The apartment no longer felt empty. It felt sacred, like a heart rebuilt after breaking. Every drop of rain that touched the glass carried a whisper of her voice. "Keep going," it seemed to say. "Keep seeing." Ethan nodded to the quiet. "I will." Outside, the city pulsed with new life. Horns, laughter, footsteps, rain. The same sounds that once drowned out her cries now sang her name. Somewhere, a child splashed in a puddle, and his laughter rose above the storm. Ethan closed his eyes, smiling. The cycle was complete. The forgotten had been remembered, and if you felt her story, If it reached some hidden corner of your heart, take this as a sign. Look around you. Someone out there is still standing in the rain, waiting to be seen. Don't walk past. Stop. Listen. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite an entire life. Like, subscribe and share this story, not for views, but for visibility. Let her voice live on through you.